The Carolinas. I laid in my sleeping bag under the sink in an empty bathroom. My bike was against the wall, my tent hung upside down against the stall, and my clothes swung over whatever walls were left to dry overnight. It's a funny sight, but I was surprisingly cozy. Even though I woke up frequently throughout the night, I still managed to get some REM sleep and felt rested in the morning. Sleeping until 7 a.m. was a feat for not having earplugs. I packed all my gear as fast as possible, just in case a ranger came around. Most of my stuff got dry, and I was stoked to not have to deal with wet camp equipment. This bathroom saved me. My only goals for South Carolina were to get to Simpsonville and visit Michael's home. Right across the border, there wouldn't be anything but forest for the first 20 miles. I was excited to get breakfast in the first town of Anderson. I made it within a few hours and the weather was perfect. I wanted to eat at IHOP, but I knew I didn't have the energy or mental capacity to ride to the other side of town where it was located. After searching the map, I found a local joint called Valerie's Diner, only a mile away. It had good reviews but no pictures. I looked at the street view and still didn't see anything at the corner. I figured it was worth a shot to try and find it, so I rode over to the unassuming neighborhood off Main Street. I found a building with no windows, only concrete walls and a sign with several pickup trucks parked outside. It felt like a biker bar. I grabbed my laptop and took my orange vest off before going inside. I entered the door and found a small room with a bar counter and a few booths. 3 people were eating, with one lady cooking in the open kitchen and another serving folks. I stood there for maybe a minute and the lady serving looks at me and says, "Well, what are you going to do with that thing?" as she points to my computer, which is still in a trash bag, my waterproofing. Immediately, everyone in the diner looked at me like I was a stupid idiot. I looked at her and said, "Well, I was gonna do some writing. Is that all right?" She gave me this unsatisfied grin and said, "Well, go sit yourself down. What are you drinking?" It was like one of those scenes in Western movies where the new guy walks into a bar and nobody likes him. Thankfully for me, this scenario didn't end with being challenged to a duel in the dusty street. I ordered a coffee and biscuits and gravy while beginning to type away. I tried to keep to myself and ride it out until someone else talked to me. I felt introverted and self-conscious in that moment and didn't want to be embarrassed. Eventually, the lady serving started to chat me up. She explained that they knew everybody who came into this restaurant and that strangers hardly ever made their way to this side of town. She said I looked mighty suspicious, but granted, I had a computer, baggy clothes, and a large unkept beard. I told her I was riding cross-country and keeping a journal on my computer. After I explained myself, she was friendly and treated me like a regular. She introduced me to Valerie, who was cooking, and told everybody in the diner what I was doing. It was a true Southern hospitality type situation. After finishing my food, I said goodbye to everyone and wrote down my website on a napkin. The 2 ladies followed me outside and sent me off with hugs and kind words. My heart was full, and I headed onto the road again with another human experience under my belt. I enjoyed the landscape of South Carolina. It has beautiful hills and perfect green flowing grass. I noticed a lot of bluegrass advertisements and dance clubs. I could only imagine how fun they would be late into the wee hours of the night. As I approached Simpsonville, a woman waved me down to stop and talk. Her name was Wendy, and she was an absolute delight. She was widowed and vowed to spend the rest of her life pursuing adventures with her daughter. She explained how she has a heart for travelers and was bursting with joy and encouragement. She offered me a place to stay in Simpsonville, but I explained I was already staying with Michael. Instead of accommodations, she invited me to take a swing dance lesson with her that evening in the city. I told her I loved to swing and hadn't done it in a long time. We exchanged numbers, and I told her I'd let her know if I could make it out once I settled in. Getting to Michael's house was an adventure in itself. People in Greenville, South Carolina, drive worse than in Atlanta. It was just a bunch of neighborhoods and city streets curving around ditches and sidewalks with no room on the side. Simpsonville is a suburb of Greenville, which has a BMW manufacturing plant. The entire area was filled with gentrification and wealthy folks. Everybody drove nice cars and had no patience for cyclists on the streets. The whole vibe of the town felt sanitized. I survived the narrow city streets and finally arrived at Michael and Melissa's. They didn't plan anything for the night, so I convinced them to swing dance with me. This swing group did a lesson from 7 to 8 p.m. and free dance from 8 to 11. We showed up late and missed the lesson, which made us apprehensive about jumping in. Everybody else in the room seemed to know what they were doing, and we felt like fools. But the cool thing about swinging is its inclusive nature. You really only need to know a couple of moves and understand how to move on the beat to get out on the dance floor. You just find somebody standing on the side without a partner and go for it. There is no awkwardness or cliques. Everybody is there to enjoy each other. Afterward, Michael gave me a night tour of the city. We walked around downtown and got a drink. Greenville has a river that flows through the middle, and everything is built around it. A pedestrian bridge elevated us above the water and offered a nice view of the natural waterfall below. One positive thing about gentrification is the money flowing into public spaces. I found myself basking in the privilege of an ever-increasing economic engine. It was a quick stop with Michael, but combined with the one day of riding, we thoroughly enjoyed our time together and had some lasting memories. I have a friend named Rob, and he lives with his family near Asheville, North Carolina. I convinced him to come pick me up from Simpsonville. Asheville wasn't in the direction I needed to ride, but I wanted to visit him and his family since I was so close. Starting in Asheville would keep me on my projected schedule to meet some friends in Washington, D.C. in June. I met Rob and his family in 2010 during skateboard events that we performed in together. He lived in Kansas City for a couple of years, but ended up back on his family's mountainside homestead in Clyde, North Carolina. They have a small house that sits on a decent amount of land, and you can walk up the mountain right outside their back door. Rob owns a paint company and drove a custom murdered-out Honda Odyssey minivan. It was gunmetal black, sleek, and stealthy. I had been visiting Rob every year since 2014 and was excited to keep the tradition going. When Rob made it to Simpsonville, we grabbed burritos for a quick lunch on the way out of town. Michael took us to this spot where the burritos were cheap and the size of my bicep. In record time, I woofed down my burrito and realized the homies didn't have the appetite to finish theirs. I hate wasting, so I did them a solid and finished their food too. Honestly, I was still hungry. Rob made fun of my appetite, and I told them this trip allowed me to easily eat 6,000 to 10,000 calories a day. I've been gaining weight for the first time in my life, but I'm unsure if it's the muscle or the food. After catching up on our lives over the hour-and-a-half drive to North Carolina, we decided to visit the famous Foundation DIY skate park in Asheville. Rob only skates on special occasions, so it was fun that he took off the whole afternoon just to spend with me. Within 45 minutes of being at the skate park, I bruised my heel and decided I didn't want to keep hurting myself. Skateboarding is tough when you've grown new leg muscles and haven't stepped on a board in 2 months. Also, skateboarding is 95% falling, and my body wasn't ready for that yet. Bicycling is so much easier. Rob mentioned that his wife, Sopek, was cooking dinner and we better head back to his place. When we arrived home, I found Sopek's family was in town from Ohio, and they had a list of activities planned to celebrate Memorial Day weekend. Sopek's parents are first-generation immigrants from Cambodia, and they all still speak the language. Her brothers and parents were all there with the kids. Probably 10 to 15 people in the extended family. Rob's house is 900 square feet with 2 bedrooms, plus a 2-car garage. When it's only Rob and his 2 kids, it feels cramped. So we were all pretty cozy. I was along for the ride and ready to help out wherever they needed. Rob and I have this special bond through irony and satire. When we anticipate adverse situations, we get into stand-up comedian mode to laugh until the end. This weekend would turn out to be non-stop comedy in our minds. Thankfully, the extended family was not sleeping at Rob's house, but they came over for all the meals. The next day, we drove out to the Blue Ridge Mountains for a communal hike, which proved to be a monumental feat, considering it was a holiday weekend. We were rolling 4 vans deep into the natural forest. If you've ever been in that area, you'll understand that mountain driving is slow moving. Parking was next to impossible due to the holiday. After circling for 20 minutes, we found some grass parking only an exit up from our trailhead. We all decided to eat a quick lunch from a cooler and head to the trail. Rob's parents, sister, and brother-in-law joined us for this adventure. Imagine this group of 20-plus people gathering around a van and eating sandwiches. What got me about this scene is that Rob is 6'5", and Sopek's family is all under 5'5". He was towering over all of us. He and I would constantly lock eyes as if to say, "Do you see what I'm seeing here?" with smiles bursting from our faces. The whole park was insane and overly crowded. We had options to hike a couple different waterfalls, but our group instantly split up since no one was leading. I eventually made it down to the falls with only Rob and his kids. Sopek got lost with the rest of the family. The whole group eventually reconvened at the same waterfall, but quickly split up again to explore rocks in the river available for climbing. We spent a few hours together and definitely got our exercise in for the day. It was an adventurous afternoon in the wilderness. The rest of the night was cooking and partying. They smoked a brisket all day and had an assortment of sides. There was plenty of soda, sweet tea, and many pies for dessert. Sopek and Rob's family know how to feed a crowd. Rob's painting partner, Chris, came over to join the festivities. I ended up joking around with Rob and Chris most of the evening. We started a bonfire and had the responsibility to keep it alive. This day was overwhelming at times, but ultimately fulfilling and reminded me that I have people who care for me. We planned a leisurely drive along the Blue Ridge Parkway the next day. The Parkway is a historic road that spans from North Carolina to Tennessee through the slopes of the Blue Ridge Mountains. I was excited, but little did I know my body would not adjust well. The thing about the parkway is once you're on it, it's a commitment. It's wavy, curvy, up, down, and everything in between. You have limited chances to get off of it since it's primarily at high elevation and only exits to the ground every 30 minutes or so. I had felt a little car sickness while in Atlanta, but this was a whole different thing. I was used to going through mountains at a slow pace on my bicycle. This time around, I was sick to my stomach. Riding in cars is a whole new experience after being on a bicycle for months. I hope I'm not permanently damaged. Thankfully, we chilled out for the rest of the day and ate leftovers once we got home. I was lucky to see so many people I loved and cherished my time with them. My heart was full from another lovely weekend with friends. Sometimes I struggle with feeling loved or valued because many of my oldest friends don't live in Kansas City. I appreciated this reminder. I made sure to get to bed early that night so I could be rested to start my journey again by bicycling through the mountains towards Raleigh-Durham. In the morning, I said my goodbyes to Rob's family and they left me with a parting gift. I lost my sun hat way back in Austin and had been riding uncovered for the last few weeks. Sopek told me she had a hat that her grandmother gave her. It featured an extra large front bill in a crescent moon type shape. The back of the hat had a light cloth material that draped over the neck and buttons to connect it around the face as a mask. She explained that it was a vintage Cambodian fieldworker hat. I was ecstatic to have a new hat and one with much better coverage than my old one. I thanked her and shipped off as Rob led me in his van down the bumpy dirt driveway to the highway. I was excited to ride my bike towards Asheville to see the familiar views from a different perspective. However, getting through Asheville proved more challenging than I hoped. It took me 18 miles of rolling hills to arrive in West Asheville, which is a hipster-ish area overtaken by 20-somethings. I rode on Haywood Road, which is a main drag out there. I realized there was a scene I'd never explored before. Coffee shops, breweries, art shops. It was a vibe. This scraggly guy with a hiking bag and a beard gave me a big smile as I rode past him. He stuck his thumb out like he was hitching, and I told him to jump on. Damn hippies. Before leaving town, I wanted to stop for lunch and found a walk-up Chick-fil-A with outdoor seating. When I set my food down at a table, a man with a tucked-in shirt and New Balance shoes walked over to me. He started asking me an onslaught of questions about my ride. But it was hardly conversation. He was rifling off questions with hardly any time for me to answer. He must have been a car salesman, because this is how the finance guy treated me when I bought my car at the dealership. I was very annoyed wasting my time in this one-sided interaction. I was ready to be out of town and away from people for a while. I followed US 70 to the town of Black Mountain. This is where US 70 connects with I-40. I had to detour onto a mountainous back road to weave around and avoid the interstate. A big sign warned truckers not to take this back road route. It turned from asphalt to gravel within a few miles, which concerned me just a tad. I wanted to avoid climbing gravel mountains, but I'll do what is required of me. I followed the winding gravel road up and down for about a mile as I prepared mentally for the ascent and/or descents that lay ahead. There really isn't anything you can do to make it any easier. I can only shift my expectations and align with my fate. As I approached the bend, I saw a ridiculously steep road going up, but there's also a bike trail forking to the right. It ended up being a paved bike lane that cut straight through the ridge of the mountain instead of making a big U up and down the gravel road. Hell yeah. The icing on the cake was the trail was entirely downhill. You really can't get any better than that. I rode 3 to 5 miles curving down on this perfect asphalt lane. I couldn't believe it. I made it to the bottom and was spit out into the town of Old Fort, back onto US 70 again. I felt like I had just escaped death and cheated in the game of bike riding. I'll take any breaks I can get. Suddenly, I heard this little annoying horn honking non-stop behind me in the distance. A guy on a moped passed me and yelled, "Get off the road!" It was ironic that the moped guy told a bicyclist to get off the road. He probably lost his license from a DUI or something. Thankfully, there's never opportunity to argue with these ignorant motorists. I rode 65 miles by dinner time and decided I better not push it too hard. So I stopped at a campground in Marion, North Carolina. I talked to the attendant about camping, and he pulled out his flip phone to call someone to confirm a spot was available for me. His name was Homer. He was slightly overweight, smoking a cigarette, and spoke in a deep, raspy voice. I told him I had just ridden from San Diego, and he started coughing hard from how crazy he thought that was. He shared stories about how he used to hitchhike across America with his friends. They would run out of money and spare change to get home. Back when hitching spare changing was legal. Now you get run off the street about anywhere you try to do it. He was a real beatnik veteran. I decided to grab some food after I set up my camp. The closest restaurant in town was a KFC. That was great because Rob had told me I needed to try this new Carolina Gold chicken they were promoting. I got to the counter inside and the host, Andy, was helping me. He greeted me with a big smile and said, "Welcome to KFC." I cringe every time a business greets me like that. It takes me back to my Subway days when I had to vomit catchphrases to get paid. I will never understand companies' obsession with false sincerity. I digress. Andy was a nice guy with a gap in his front teeth and seemingly happy to be alive. He treated me with genuine Southern hospitality as I received my chicken and sweet tea, which had too much sugar. As I enjoyed my Southern cuisine, I observed all the odd propaganda plastered on the walls, visualizing the history of KFC and its founder. It was weird enough to be the only person in the restaurant, but I didn't enjoy Colonel Sanders staring at me from every wall. The next day, I woke up early to eat at a diner across the street from the campground. I'm kind of a small-town diner junkie. I love small, family-owned restaurants that have regulars and feel straight out of a movie. Diners are also the best place to find biscuits and gravy, which I'm on the hunt for the best. While locking up my bike outside, an older fellow wearing a ball cap came over to talk to me. I told him I rode from San Diego, and his eyes lit up. They always do. His gut reaction was to reach into his pocket and give me a couple bucks. He said, "Go buy yourself a coffee." I went inside the diner and scoped the scene. It was your average rural American crowd trying to start their day well. I sat at the counter and put in my usual order of scrambled eggs and hash browns, all smothered in gravy. When the waitress put the plate in front of me, she said, "Wow, that's a lot of food. That's definitely not the normal portion. I don't think I've ever seen as much food on one plate before." I smiled as the cook winked at us. He piled the eggs and potatoes on top of a full order of biscuits while drenching everything in an obscene amount of sausage gravy. They used a brown country gravy, and I appreciated this top-notch culinary experience. The terrain in North Carolina was surprisingly challenging. I've gone blind into most of the routes I chose. I don't check elevation charts or look for traffic data. My only indicator is, hey, that road looks like the most direct route to my destination and is legal for me to ride on. The northeastern part of the state ended up being very hilly and required a lot of climbing. My body and mind were strong enough to expect the worst, so difficult roads were just another day at that point. I rode through a town called Salisbury. I discovered it's the home of the Cheerwine Soda Pop, North Carolina's sweet treat. I saw signs around town about the 100th anniversary of its conception. Unfortunately, I had missed the celebration by a few days. Bummer. I always drink a few when I'm around. I planned to make it to Lexington, North Carolina for a late lunch at Lexington Barbecue. When I arrived, I found about 30 pickup trucks parked outside and a billboard that boasted, North Carolina's best barbecue. We will see about that. The menu was simple. They sold barbecue plates and sandwiches, pulled or sliced. You could get a steak or a cheeseburger. When I read barbecue, I presumed beef because it's the king of Kansas City in Texas. I was disappointed to find out that all they sold here was pork. This pork barbecue tasted like a crock pot of Sunday soup. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't the worst I've tasted. I just can't consider that the best barbecue in the state. Sorry, y'all. But go back to school. As I was sitting in my booth, minding my own business, I overheard a lady at the bar hollering at the employees. She was asking, "Who's the guy riding 7,000 miles on a bicycle?" I hollered back at her and said it was me. Apparently, my waitress told everyone in the kitchen about me, and a fellow patron overheard them talking also. When I finished eating, I walked over and spoke to her for a total of 45 seconds. It was another elevator speech type situation where she asked enough questions to start some gossip, but had zero curiosity for the larger story. Boring. In Greensboro, North Carolina, I stayed at a state park that had $15 camping. I liked the cheap ones. I arrived around 4 p.m. and the office had already closed, so I would have to wait to pay in the morning. I picked a spot in the primitive camping area and settled in. Some dude in a golf cart came by. Apparently, he was the caretaker and said he needed to get a sheet for me to fill out and then pay him for the site. I told him I needed change for a 20, and he never returned. I started making dinner and read for a bit. The bugs were out with a vengeance this evening, and it was hard to be out in the open while sitting at the picnic table. I toughed it out for an hour before calling it and settling into my tent, where I was sheltered from the elements. I'd been using sleeping pills to knock myself out while camping. The mixture of heat and 90 decibels of insect sounds made it difficult to sleep most days. I woke up the following day and planned to pay the office as soon as they opened at 8 a.m. The first order of business was finding the restroom. Unfortunately, it was 50 yards from my campsite. I found it closed and locked for no apparent reason. The next nearest bathroom was over a football field away. I was on the verge of soiling myself and barely holding it in as I waddled to the RV area to find the bathroom building. I wanted to cry from the torment of needing to unload, and I was not about to soil my clothes at this point in time. I got closer and closer to the building. When I was 10 feet away, I started running frantically as I unzipped my pants. I was sweating and panicking as I threw everything in my hands down on the floor and rushed into the stall. I didn't even close the door. I was dying. Thankfully, only one person was in the showers, and I avoided being seen in my most vulnerable state. Either biking is changing my bowels, or I'm becoming an old man at an accelerated rate. I returned to disassemble my camp while charging my phone and filling water at an empty RV site. There was this DIY teepee set up in a campground near mine, and this man with dreadlocks came out of the tent to wave at me and just said, "Namaste." I said it back and was infinitely hyped by the mellowness of this greeting. Never had someone legitimately said that to me before. It was now 8:15 a.m., and I figured the office would be open. I found the doors locked, no lights on, and no cars in the drive. I left without paying and wiped the dust from my sandals. In Durham, North Carolina, I was excited to meet up with my friend's dad, whom everyone calls Pops. He has gray hair, thick frame glasses, and a warm personality. He had been living in Durham for a couple of years, and I couldn't remember the last time I saw him. He hit me up on Instagram and said I needed to come stay with him and kick it. I conquered a woven landscape of hills and beautiful countryside to find him. He requested we meet at an Irish pub downtown, in which he was a regular. When I walked into the room, I found out that he had made me a celebrity in his friend group. I grabbed a stout and sat down to talk with this group of 6 to 8 guys. I don't know how they all met, but the kinship they shared seemed to be unbreakable. The group varied from 35 to 60 years old. These men were boisterous and curious about how I was holding up. They asked me many questions as I tried to learn a little about them. Great people, and it felt like a scene out of a sitcom. Pops introduced me to his friend Rob and told me I'd be staying at his house. Rob had lived in several cities throughout his adult life and had been on movie crews in New Zealand. He was now a bartender, or mixologist might be the correct term. He and his business partner started a company making tonics to put in mixed drinks while also running a restaurant. Pops took me back to Rob's house so I could clean up and head back out on the town for the evening. He took me on a little tour of downtown Durham as we walked towards the house. He introduced me to his roommate, a spunky hippie woman in her 40s or 50s with long, gorgeous silver hair. Pops gave me the lowdown on the local bar scene and took me to all of his favorite spots. I was intolerably hungry, but I wanted to let Pops lead the way. At the first bar, I was introduced to this guy named John. He was an Irishman and seemingly a tough dude. He was stocky and spoke with aggression, intimidating to say the least. He was playing darts and had already drank a couple tall boys. He immediately ordered around and gave me a firm handshake. Pops told him what I was doing, and he couldn't believe what he heard. He was impressed that I had the balls to ride alone around America. John is the last person I would expect to be concerned about my well-being. He became my advocate for the rest of the night and would talk me up to everyone I met. I need this guy to write my next job recommendation letter. We ended up at 4 more bars and finished the night by grabbing a snack of fried cheese curds and banh mi at a random restaurant run by college kids. It was much needed fuel after hours of drinking beer on an empty stomach. It was fun going from place to place while talking and meeting rad people. This is different from how I socialized back home, but it was a welcomed change of pace. I'm not much of a late night person, I was exhausted as we ended up back at Rob's house, gathered around his tiki bar. They kept trying to mix me more drinks, and I was physically falling asleep. It was close to 1 a.m., and I had to tap out so I could survive the long day towards Virginia ahead of me. I let the group of guys know I needed to call it a night. I gave them all hugs and said goodbye, since I would not be seeing them at 6 a.m. the following day. I crashed on the couch and soaked in as much sleep as I could after a drunken night. The Carolinas were full of great friends and more encouragement than I would need to get up the East Coast. The loneliness I felt in the desert was finally starting to wear off. However, I was still stuck in a mindset that based my mileage goals on how quickly I could make it to visit another friend. The strangers in North Carolina were friendly, but less open-hearted than in other states. I felt treated with less than a transactional nature. I'm learning more about different personalities and how to interact with them. Being amongst the mountains was an experience I kept close to my heart. Something about being surrounded by the green peaks fills my soul with mystery and awe. I found myself constantly making up little songs about the feeling you get from the mountain's power. I got my share of elevation gain and feel like a pro at conquering slopes now, even though it's not even close to the gains I'll find in the north. I'm getting stronger, and the riding feels easier as the weeks go on. With that said, my legs don't stop hurting when I'm off the bike. I feel like my legs numb themselves from the intense physical activity whenever I'm pedaling. As I end my time in the southern United States, I reflect on the beauty and slow pace I found everywhere. It's the calm before the storm as I anticipate the onslaught of bustling cities while heading along the East Coast. I'm excited to leave the woods and navigate the concrete jungle, visiting the places where our young nation was formed. I default to being a city boy, but I'm a naturalist at heart.